Greetings and welcome. My name is Jack and this is a beginner's guide for the Pathfinder 2nd edition Rogue, where we try to learn a new class by theory crafting a character build from level 1 to level 20. As always, we're going to start with a brief class introduction, then we're going to move on to the character concept, then I'm going to describe the build from level 1 to level 20, and finally I'm going to show a damage projection for the character. If you would like to know more about the Rogue, you can check out Terrandor's Guide to the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Rogue and RPG Bot's Rogue Handbook. Without further ado, let's get right into the video. The Rogue is a character which specializes on high damage, stealthiness, thievery, scouting, and usually has a very high number of skills. They are considered a martial class, although for being a martial they're usually quite squishy. Therefore, in many games, rogues tend to fit in the glass cannon role. A defining feature of the rogue character, which is present in Pathfinder 2nd Edition as well, is their sneak attack. This is their ability to deal extra damage if they can target an enemy under certain condition. This can be the enemy being unaware of the presence of the rogue, or the rogue being in a favorable position with respect to their allies. In Pathfinder, a rogue can sneak attack an enemy if they simply have the flat-footed condition, and they're using an agile or finesse attack or a ranged attack. And this sneak attack deals extra precision damage. When compared to the same feature of D&D 5th edition, this attack applies to any number of attacks that the rogue might carry out during their turn, but it does scale more slowly. So instead of scaling at every odd level, the Pathfinder Rogue's sneak attack scales at 5th, 11th, and 17th level. Other features of the rogue characters include their ability to trigger extra effects when they hit and damage flat-footed enemies through the debilitating strike feature, high reflex saving throw, and in general a focus on dexterity, incredibly high perception, and most importantly, their rackets, which are their subclasses. Since, as we said, the rogue main goal in combat is to inflict and exploit the flat-footed condition, many rackets give you extra ways to do exactly that. So we have the Mastermind racket, which allows you to flat-foot enemies by succeeding in a recall knowledge check against them, or the Scoundrel racket, which upgrades the power of the feint action. Other rackets add additional abilities to the rogue and change a bit the way they play. For example, the Ruffian racket makes a more strength-focused rogue who wants to use intimidation, while thieves are all about dexterity. So unlike all other rogues which want to invest in strength, because strength is still the damage stat even for finesse weapons, for the thief this problem is solved. They use dexterity for damage as well. And to round out the overview of rackets, we also have the Eldritch Trickster, which is the classical magic-focused rogue archetype. So it's a class which offers different possibilities and some very exciting features, and its biggest downfalls are the armor proficiencies, which are not particularly good for a character which wants to spend most of their time in melee, and their hit points, which are 8 plus your constitution modifier, unlike most martials, which have 10. So you probably want to be very careful how much time you spend in the face of your enemy. Another feature worthy of note for the rogue is the number of skill feats that they get throughout the character development. All other characters in Pathfinder get a skill feat every other level, but the rogue gets skill feats every single level, and skill increases every single level, which means that eventually they're going to have twice as many legendary skills available when compared to other characters. Now, this sounds incredibly powerful, and it's certainly very satisfactory to play a character who can do a lot of things. I don't think, however, this is as overpowered as you might think coming in from a game like D&D, because skill and skill feats are not all made equal. There are these skills that are very impactful in combat, like intimidation, medicine, diplomacy even, and then there are skills like nature or religion, which, yes, they are going to eventually be used sometimes in your campaign, but I think you can have a party of adventurers without anyone being trained in that skill and don't run into any big issues ever throughout your campaign. So for the rogue, it's very easy to feel like you don't really know where to spend your skill increases and your skill feats because they don't really matter much. Which on one hand means you can literally do whatever you want and you're not going to make a bad character, but it also feels that the impact that this feature has on your character and on your playstyle isn't that big. So with this overview in mind, let's see what I plan to do with the rogue class. Since Pathfinder 2nd edition is very generous with giving you the ability to sneak attack with every single attack the rogue does and not just one, which was true for previous editions of Dungeons & Dragons, I would say that this encourages you to deliver as many attacks as possible as a rogue in order to trigger your sneak attack as much as possible. Of course, you also want to attack flat-footed enemies basically all the time. Now this again creates the usual conundrum of creating a character build in a vacuum where this is clearly a class designed to synergize with the party. So as a rogue, you really want another martial character together with you, because the easiest way to flat-foot an enemy is always to flank them. And if the rogue doesn't have access to this option, because, for example, they are the only melee character of the party, then all of a sudden their lives become very difficult. Not just because of how hard it is for them to flat-foot the enemy, but because they are then exposed in melee alone without any support, and their squishiness can really be a problem for them. So with this build, we're going to try our best to apply the flat-footed condition independently, and we're also going to try and deliver as many attacks as possible. Double Slice is a very appealing feat for that, but actually Double Slice just decreases your multiple attack penalty, but doesn't increase your action efficiency. A feat that does that is the Monk's Flurry of Blows. Now this is a feat which you'll unlock later on in your character development, but it is so powerful, as we saw in the Monk video, that I think that giving it to the Rogue, and the Rogue is able to sneak attack using their unarmed attacks, might allow us to build an explosive damage dealing class eventually. So since I want to combine Monk and Rogue, this is a great opportunity to showcase the power of the Stumbling Stance. In my Monk video, I took this as my signature stance for my character, but I only took it because it offered a very powerful one-handed attack. However, that stance also allows you to synergize with the feint action, and it provides you some feats that support this idea of a drunken master that, thanks to the unpredictable fighting style, is able to very easily inflict the flat-footed condition. Now, I decided not to fully leverage this for my monk because I felt that the monk was multiple attribute dependent enough without needing to dip into charisma as well, and so I had to neglect that old part of the feat. But since this character can make the most out of the flat-footed condition, it's even more important for them than it is for the monk, then I think we can justify investing more into charisma. Besides, we are a rogue, and rogues are known to be sometimes also face characters, so being charismatic as a rogue feels very fitting. So we are going to be building a drunken master rogue who will eventually be able to carry out a huge number of attacks for a very low action price. And we are going to see exactly how well that does for damage. Despite our damage being inherently lower because of our lower weapon damage die and lower strength modifier, which still applies to our damage because we're not going with the teeth for this build, let's see how well we compete with dedicated martial characters. All right, we are at level 1. Let's start with our ancestry. It's been a while since I did a Goblin build. Actually, I only did one for the Barbarian, and this is a terrible sin, which I need to rectify right now because Goblin is clearly the best ancestry in the game. So let's make a Goblin rogue, because Goblin has a lot of feats which synergize very well with what the rogue tries to do. Lidda is the iconic rogue from Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition, so maybe the story of our character is that Lidda died and she was reincarnated as a goblin, and she didn't really like that very much, so she took to drinking heavily, and eventually this unhealthy lifestyle is going to catch up to her and start affecting the way she fights. For the background, as always, you can pick your favorite. Martial Disciple Acrobatics seems fitting for a rogue. We get the Catfall feat, which is helpful. We are going to raise Acrobatics up to Legendary, so being able to ignore fall damage seems kind of nice. For our Heritage, I don't feel like we really need a versatile Heritage, but what we do need is a bunch of HP. So Unbreakable Goblin allows us to start with 10 hit points, which is very helpful for a squishy rogue. Let's take a look at our abilities. We want Dexterity every time that we can get it. Constitution seemed important for a frontline character. And once we allocate our 3 boosts, we start with a 14 in Strength and Constitution, the usual 18 in our main stack, which is Dexterity. And thanks to the Goblin boost, we get a 14 in Charisma, which we will rely heavily into this build. Now, this build has already a glaring issue, and this is we dumped our Wisdom, and we really heavily dumped it. Now, this is not going to be much of an issue. We are Dexterity masters, and we are going to be stealthing all the time, so we will use Dexterity for initiative. But our will saving throws are going to be absolute garbage. So this character has a glaring weakness. All my Goblin builds so far have had glaring and almost suicidal weaknesses, but that's the fun of playing a Goblin. We will try eventually to address this and hopefully take some fail saves to try and improve the saving throws, but this is probably a very questionable choice, and you should never dump your will as hard as I'm doing right now. So don't do this at home, kids. This is where the incredible number of skills that the rogue gets comes into play. Our background gives us acrobatics. Let's take athletics as well. Let's take all the social skills, because we will be investing in charisma, so we might as well be good at doing face stuff. We have crappy wisdom, but let's invest into medicine and use it with assurance. Since we get so many skill feats, we might as well take one of the best skills in the game. And then we are rogues, so of course thievery is important for us. So I would say these are the most important skills to have. We have still one missing. You can take whatever you want. Let's take crafting, why not? For our ancestry feat, Goblin gives us very sneaky. This allows us to sneak 5 extra feet when we take the sneak action. This is eventually going to become redundant when we gain more advanced class feats, but right now it gives us an extra 5 feet of movement when we're sneaking, which is nice. The real amazing thing about this very sneaky feat is that we can chain sneak actions and remain in stealth, even though we do not finish our sneak action under cover. So usually you would have to move from cover to avoid being detected. And if you finish a sneak action in the middle of a room, then you will be detected. However, thanks to this feat, we only have to finish our turn and not our action behind cover. We get a class feat. Let's get a reaction right from level 1, just like fighters. Unlike fighters, we're not going to use this to deal damage, but hopefully to increase our survivability. We can gain a +2 circumstance bonus to the armor class against an attack we can see. We definitely need that because we are very squishy, as I said. For our first skill feat, as I said, we have crappy wisdom modifier, but eventually we're going to be using, if necessary, medicine. So let's take assurance in that. And we have to choose our racket. As I said, I'm not going for the thief racket, though this is probably the best one for the damage, especially at the low level. But since I'm planning on fainting so much, the scoundrel racket is perfect for us. This makes it so when we successfully feint against a target, that target is flat-footed against all our melee attacks, not just the next melee attack. And if we critically succeed at feinting, then they will be flat-footed against any and all melee attackers, not just us. And the scoundrel is going to give us additional feats as we level up to support our fainting actions. The only sad thing about scoundrels is that rogues get debilitating strike features, so features that upgrade their debilitating strike, and this scoundrel is among the most disappointing, so I'm not even going to take that. So we will be using our debilitating strike just with the base effect. We can make enemies a bit slower, and we can make them enfeebled 1, increasing our survivability if we are facing enemies that use strength to attack, but not much else with this feature. Still, for the support that the scoundrel gives to fainting, I think it's the best choice for this character. It's level 2 and our skills are starting to increase, although this is an even level. Since this is a fainting build, I think deception is a skill we should prioritize. And speaking of which, thanks to the scoundrel racket, we can take distracting feint at level 2. This makes it so when a creature is flat-footed by our feints, it also takes a -2 circumstance penalty to perception checks and reflex saves. This incidentally makes it easier for us to keep feinting against that enemy after we succeeded once, because the feint action is a deception check against the opponent perception DC. So very nice. Our archetype, as I said, is going to be the monk archetype. Right now, this is allowing us to strike with our fists, but this is not going to be necessarily very effective. We have better options for weapons, such as the rapier. So this is a dedication which will pay off in a level, but it does give us an extra skill training. Already we have kind of maxed out the skill that we really want, so we can pick whatever. Let's take society, why not? And for our skill feats, I will take Confabulator, thanks to our expert deception proficiency. This makes our create diversions and lie actions better. Usually, if we try to use them multiple times against an enemy, we get penalties to do so, because the enemy wisens up to our nonsense. But as our proficiency in deception is going to raise up, eventually this penalty is going to outright disappear. And right now, we still get a -2 reduction to this penalty. So we might be using create a diversion in combat to hide and escape dangerous situations, and we will use lie out of combat a lot because we are rogues, so this might come in very helpful. Level 3, second skill increase, and we are rogues, and stealth is probably the most iconic and important skill for us. You might want to prioritize this over deception if you feel like you're not going to be fainting a lot yet. This also upgrades our initiative, because instead of using our +4 crappy perception bonus, we will try to use our +7 stealth by avoiding notice as much as possible. Speaking of initiative, incredible initiative is as always incredible. And for skill feats, I'll take an iconic stealth skill feat, which improves the stealth action. We also unlock the deny advantage class feature. This makes it so it's harder to flat-foot us, so a bit of an increase to our survivability, which is always welcome. Level 4, more skill increases. Let's get medicine, that's a nice skill to have. And we get another feat which supports the fainting that we are trying to do, and that is overextending feint. So we cannot stack the effects of fainting on a character, but this allows us to unlock an additional effect for our feint action. So we feint, we apply the flat-footed condition, and eventually we are going to be able to very conveniently feint multiple times in a turn. So if we succeed on an enemy which is already suffering from the flat-footed condition from our feint, we can instead choose to apply this additional effect. And this effect is that the target takes a -2 circumstance penalty to its next attack roll against us. And if we critically succeed, it's a -2 circumstance penalty to all attack rolls. So this is another nice increase to our survivability. So we can stack this, for example, with Nimble Dodge to try and gain stacking bonuses to armor class and hopefully not just be squished to death. Level 4 is a very important level for us because we get our first monk feat thanks to basic kata, and that feat is the stance. And it's the stumbling stance that I was talking about. So our drinking has catched up to us, and now we're basically constantly drunk in combat. This makes it so we unlock a better attack than the rapier. This is a 1d8 backstabber attack, which we're going to use all the time. While in this stance, we also gain a circumstance bonus to deception checks to feint, which is incredible. And every time an enemy hits us, then they become flat-footed against our next attack. So this synergizes amazingly well with the rogue class. This might disincentivize enemies from striking us, further increasing our survivability. For our skill feat, we just increased medicine, so let's take medicine stuff and invest into continual recovery. Level 5, another skill increase. We have charisma, so we can invest in the premium charisma skill, which is intimidation. We also get ability boosts, and we're going to boost the usual suspects: strength, constitution, dexterity, and charisma. There is an argument here to forget about charisma, keep it at 14, and just try and avoid being mind-controlled, frightened, and all this stuff all the time to invest into wisdom. But that is the coward route. We are brave goblins. We don't need high wisdom modifiers. We're just going to roll high and be safe. For our ancestry feat, this requires a bit of backstory. Remember to be a worshipper of Lamashtu or something like that. As I said, our drinking problem probably landed us into some unsavory circles. Maybe we started worshipping the wrong kind of deity in the hope that they might grant us respite from our abominable goblin condition. So maybe we are worshipping Lamashtu or something like that. But basically, the chosen one ancestry feat allows us to get an extra goblin heritage. And we might as well take Charhide Goblin for the extra fire resistance. We also get another skill feat. And we're going to keep investing into the medicine feats, taking Ward Medic. We also get, like all marshals, expert proficiency in weapons, and we get access to critical specialization effects of our weapons. It's very nice to see that the rogue has the same dignity and weapon progression as all other martials. This has not always been the case in previous editions. So hooray for the rogue. Level 6, another skill increase. Might as well increase acrobatics. It's probably a useful skill to have for a rogue. We get an incredibly powerful class feat in the form of Gang Up. Now an enemy is flat-footed against our melee attacks as long as the enemy is both within reach of us and another ally. So we don't need to position in the usual flanking way, although we might want to because this only works for us and not for our allies. So let's say that this is useful in emergencies where for whatever reason we don't have enough movement to walk around the enemies, or maybe we don't want to trigger opportunity attacks by doing so. For our free archetype feat, we are squishy, we are in melee. These are two bad combinations. So let's take Monk Resiliency. From now on, every time we take Monk feats, our HP are going to increase by 3. Very nice. We also get a skill feat, and let's take Intimidating Prowess. We have high strength, we are expert in intimidation, so we no longer get the penalty to intimidate for not sharing a language, and we get a bonus to intimidation thanks to our high strength. This is the reason why, despite having intimidation, I did not invest into Intimidating Glare early on, because this makes it redundant. And also because I feel that right now we don't really have that many actions to intimidate in combat. We want to stride around, we want to feint a lot, so probably we're not going to have a lot of actions to intimidate. But you know what intimidation does, it gives you free actions eventually, so investing into this is going to eventually pay off. Speaking of that, let's get some of those intimidation feats going by increasing its proficiency. First, let's not forget the general feats. I think this is a good moment to increase our survivability by taking Adopted Ancestry Dwarf to unlock some ancestry feats which will increase our hit points further. And as for the skill feats, we could take Battle Cry for the free action. However, this feat, called Skeptic Defense, is probably going to be essential considering how terrible our will saving throws are. This allows us to use our intimidation check to counteract once per day a mental spell of effect which is targeting us. If we succeed, we also stupefy the creature which applied this effect. This can be a lifesaver against all these horrible will saving throw targeting effects which we are terrible against. We get evasion for improved proficiency in reflex saving throw and the ability to critically succeed on a regular success. We also get increased proficiency in perception. Too bad we are not using it very much. And we get our weapon specialization. Level 8, previously we prioritized intimidation because of that skeptic defense feat, which I felt was really important to get going as soon as possible. But let's not forget, deception is our key skill with this build. At level 8, we get another amazing class feat for the rogues, which is Opportune Backstab. This is our opportunity attack. It comes online very late, only it's level 8. Other martials usually unlock this sooner, but it is very easy to trigger. Basically, we can make an opportunity attack when an enemy is hit by one of our allies. As long as we have another buddy, this can trigger very easily. Of course, if we are in a party where we are the only martial character, again, this is very bad for a rogue. And I would suggest investing into an animal companion or something, because the rogue as a class just doesn't work on its own. It needs support from and coordination with allies. Another free archetype feats. And Monk moves is just amazing for the rogue. Our dexterity is +5. We don't really need to wear armor anymore, so we can just benefit from this movement bonus. And for the skill feat, now we can get our free action Intimidate at the start of combat with Battle Cry. This is not necessarily something we might want to use very often. For example, if you are trying to be stealthy, this is probably not very good. But free actions are free actions, and I cannot pass up on them. Level 9, look at all these skill increases that we are getting. Speaking of being stealthy, let's invest into that. Let's get the feat that it's the reason to invest into the Dwarf Ancestry, which is Mountain's Stoutness for the extra HP. Let's also get a stealth skill feat, which is Swift Sneak. This allows us to move at full speed while sneaking. And combining this with Very Sneaky from the Goblin, we can cover incredible amounts of ground without being detected. We get our debilitating strikes, I mentioned that before. Keep in mind that the penalty from Enfeebled stacks with the penalty that we inflict through overextending feint, because this is a circumstance penalty, whereas enfeebled gives a status penalty. And we could make it so it's even harder to hit us by also using nimble dodge. So our survivability is starting to look a bit more acceptable, although we are certainly not tanks. Our survivability is better also because our proficiency in fortitude has increased. Level 10, another skill increase, acrobatics for another free action feat. And ability boosts are going to go in the usual spots: strength, constitution, dexterity, and charisma. For a class feat, this is another very powerful class feat, which we didn't get at level 8 because our opportunity attack was more important. But this reaction is perhaps more powerful than an opportunity attack. This allows us to give basically advantage on an attack roll or skill check to one of our allies. We can do this once per day for every ally, but advantage is not very common in Pathfinder 2nd edition. So this is a great party support ability. But the real treasure at level 10 is that we finally get Monk's Flurry. We can use the Flurry of Blows action. We can finally attack for the cost of a single action twice with our unarmed stumbling swing strikes. Hopefully this is going to increase a lot our damage. We also get another free action, as I was mentioning before. Thanks to Keep Up, we can now stand up as a free action and without triggering opportunity attacks. Very nice. At level 11, we are rogues. People are going to expect us to do thievery things, so let's invest a bit into it. For the general feat, I'm going to take Fleet. As I said, we are melee characters, so movement is probably important for us. And we can take a stealth feat, which is foil senses. So now we can sneak and avoid notice and hide while taking precautions against senses like blind sight and so on. We also increase our proficiency rank for our rogue class this season. Level 12 is where this build actually explodes, and all the decisions we made up to this point pay off. So maybe level 12 is a retrain level. Maybe you can play your earlier rogue levels as a more optimized character, maybe a thief, which focuses more on dealing damage and doesn't have janky choices like the monk archetype, which doesn't do much when you take it. But I don't think the character is unplayable up to this point. It's just that the power spike that we get at this level is just incredible. So we get a skill, and we might increase thievery up to master. That's not a big deal. The first thing we get, which is a big deal, is the preparation feat. This gives us an action, preparation, which we can use to gain an additional reaction that can be used before the beginning of our next turn for any rogue reaction. So this can be Inspired Stratagem, this can be Nimble Dodge, but more often than not, this is going to be Opportune Backstab. What this allows us to do is to do an extra attack without the multiple attack penalty, on top of any other opportunity attacks we might want to do. Absolutely incredible. But it doesn't end there, because we can take Advanced Kata, and the Stumbling Feint feat has just become available. This means that every time we use Flurry of Blows, we can automatically attempt for free a check to feint as a free action. And on a success, the character is flat-footed on both our Flurry of Blows attacks. Now, this would have already been the case because we are scoundrels, but a free feint at the beginning of our Flurry of Blows means that we can more easily use a follow-up action to just regular feint and apply the effects of our overextending feint, for example. So we really are the feint master. This is even more action economy cheese, by the way. And finally, we had a skill feat. Since we all of a sudden become very action efficient, we might be able to squeeze in our combat routine an intimidation now and then. We also have a free intimidation at the start of combat. So we can take Terrifying Resistance, which says that if we succeed in demoralizing a creature, we have +1 circumstance bonus to all saving throws against that creature's spells. This might come in very handy, for example, to help us a bit with our will saving throws again, but also all other types of saves. So remember to scream very loudly at wizards when you see them. Level 13, more skill increases. Let's increase medicine. For our ancestry feats, we get the upgrade to Very Sneaky, which is aptly named Very, Very Sneaky. This says that we can move up to our speed when we use the sneak action. We can already do that thanks to Swift Sneak. But we also no longer need to have cover, or greater cover, or be concealed to hide or sneak. Very, very good. For the skill feat, since we increased our proficiency in medicine, let's take more medicine feats and take Advanced First Aid to make our Administer First Aid action better. We We also get a bunch of stuff. We get better proficiency in reflex saving throws. It increases up to legendary, and critical failures become failures, and on failures we only take half damage. We get legendary perception, very good. We get better proficiency in light armor and unarmored defense. That's something, I guess, better than nothing. A bit late, as I said, squishy. And we get better weapon proficiency. Level 14, at this point we are really scraping the bottom of the barrel of skills. You can take an extra skill training if you want. You can increase a trained skill up to expert. Let's increase crafting. I don't know. This is what I meant when I said that at a certain point you really don't know what to do with all these skill increases and skill feats. But class feats, on the other hand, are consistently incredible. We can take a free action we can do once every 10 minutes. The trigger of this action is if a physical attack would reduce us to 0 HP. We can take this free action and take half damage from the triggering attack. This can and will save our lives. For our free archetype, let's take Perfection's Path. This frees up general skill feats, so we don't have to take Canny Acumen, and this also triggers 3 levels earlier than Canny Acumen. And we can fix our Fortitude saving throws. For our skill feats, we do want to eventually take the Legendary Thievery feat, so let's take Pickpocket and be a bit better at stealing stuff. We are rogues after all. Level 15, it's the first legendary skill increase. Deception is looking very appealing, but the legendary feat for Intimidation is just too good to pass up. Let's just grab it right away. It's Scare to Death. It's just an Intimidate action on steroids. We get our ability boosts. We are going to commit to Strength, Constitution, Dexterity, and Charisma. Again, maybe you don't really care about giving these bonuses to Strength and Constitution, because maybe you're not even going to get to level 20. If that is the case, you can shore up your crappy wisdom, you can shore up your crappy intelligence. It's probably the best option, but we are building for max damage and max HP. We are bringing this build up to level 20, so we are taking this choice right here. In a real campaign, in a real playthrough, you might want to do things differently here. We have a general feat, and we can take Toughness for the survivability. We get an upgrade to our debilitating strikes, so we can both slow the enemy down, reducing their speed, and inflict the enfeebled condition. It's not that good because we are scoundrels, but it's something, you know, and we get greater weapon specialization. Level 16, we get the second legendary skill increase, so surely we are going to increase Deception now. Well, you know, we are rogues, and we survived this far without legendary Deception, and the skill feat, legendary skill feat for stealth, is also incredibly amazing because it gives us a free action. So we can hide in plain sight. We can already do that thanks to our Goblin feat. But when we explore using an exploration tactic other than avoiding notice, we automatically avoid notice. So during exploration, we can actually undertake 2 actions, so scouting and avoid notice, for example. For class feats, we have access to a reaction which helps, again, shore up our crappy saving throws. So if we are affected by a mental effect that we gain by failing a saving throw, but not critically failing, and our turn ends, we can then suppress that effect until the end of our next turn. So we're going to spend half the turns running away in abject terror and hopefully going to be more useful. Or if we are being dominated, we can use all our actions to run very far away from combat to avoid harming our allies. This is a nice fail-safe to have in place. Let's get more monk archetype feats. At this point, we are getting them mostly for the extra HP. Although, one thing that we can get thanks to the monk archetype is focus points and focus spells, which the rogue doesn't have. And we could take Key Strike for a little bit of extra damage once on a single attack, once per combat. But I think that for a rogue, getting Key Rush is just incredible. This is something that we can do once per combat, and we can move twice with a single action. We also gain the Concealed condition during the movement and at the start of our next turn, so it also increases our defenses. We want to flank as much as possible, despite our gang up ability to provide support to our allies. We maybe want to get out of combat, out of trouble as fast as possible. This added mobility seems to be more impactful than the little bit of damage that Key Strikes get. We can choose whether this is a divine or occult effect. Let's go for divine, why not? We are goblins, we are chosen ones, surely we have the favor of the gods. At level 17, finally, we're going to get Deception up to Legendary. For our 17th level feat, we can take Unbreakabler Goblin. This gives us even more hit points, so that's neat. And we can take the Legendary Deception skill feat. It's rare, but if we were actually able to survive up to level 17 with this Goblin that has no will, I think we do deserve a bit of a rare feat as a reward. It's not overpowered, but it is very funny. This allows us to attempt a deception check against the target will DC, and if we succeed, we convince them that we had been playing a minor but recurring role in their life. This will frighten them and give us some information on the subject. So it's very fun roleplay-wise to have this action available. We get Master Proficiency at Will Saving Throw, and when we roll successes at Will Saves, we get a critical success. We don't really need this because, as I said, we're only going to roll 20s on Will Saving Throws, so it's a bit redundant. It's level 18, and we can get another legendary skill increase, and we can increase Thievery. For the class feats, we are getting another reaction. We have a lot of reactions with this build, but many of them are circumstantial, so I don't think this is too much of a problem. And what Trickster's Ace does is it makes us a wizard. This is the contingency spell, but better because we can use it on any single spell from the Arcane, Divine, Occult, or Primal list of 4th level or lower. And we specify the triggers, and then we can activate this contingency when these triggers occur. We can have this active once per daily preparations. Do you want to become invisible on a trigger? Do you want to dimension door yourself out of trouble? The possibilities are the possibilities offered by contingency, which are endless. And this is an incredibly powerful, fun, flavorful feat. I wish you could get it sooner, but it's just great. More advanced kata for our pre-archetype feats. And since we have now access to key spells, we can take other key feats for the monk. I will take Wholeness of Body right now. This gives us an extra focus point and the ability to use a single action to regain hit points. So this is amazing for our survivability. This can also cure poison or diseases affecting us. And for our level 18 skill feat, we can take the legendary Thievery feat. This allows us to steal basically even bolted down stuff, steal people's clothing. It's not necessarily very powerful, but it's certainly very fun, so we might as well take it. Level 19, we can increase medicine up to legendary. We get a general feat, and we can leverage our legendary perception, just like we did with the ranger, and take true perception. This gives us true seeing permanently on. Very useful, especially for a scout. We can also take the legendary medicine skill feat, which is legendary medic. We get master proficiency in light armor and unarmored defense. It's level 19. It's a bit late for that, but I guess better now than never. And we also get this incredibly powerful free action Master Strike. When we strike a flat-footed creature and deal damage, that target then has to make a fortitude saving throw, and then it becomes immune to Master Strike. But if they fail, they become paralyzed. Even if they succeed, they become enfeebled too. And if they critically fail, we can outright kill them on a singular strike. So very flavorful ability for a rogue. Looks almost like a capstone ability, and I'm very glad to have it. And finally, we come to the conclusion of our character. We get our final skill increase, and we get our final legendary skill, which might as well be acrobatics. We get our final ability boosts, reaching 20 in all our important stats, except for dexterity, which goes up to 22. Our capstone feats were not that impressive. Among the best one, there's probably Enduring Debilitation, but our debilitation effects are not that powerful, so there isn't much reason for us to take it. Instead, I'm going to go a little bit back in levels and take Perfect Distraction. This allows us to leverage our legendary deception proficiency, and it allows us to basically leave a decoy behind, create this illusionary copy, and then sneak, just like with the spell Mislead. We aren't invisible, but we are undetected, and we are very good at remaining undetected because we are being rogue. So we can use this once every 10 minutes to get in a safe spot or evade dangerous situations. We also get our final free archetype, and I'm going to take a final monk feat and a final key spell, which will round up our focus pool with 3 focus points. And another way we can spend one of these 3 focus points is by using wind jump, which gives us a flying speed, and as long as we succeed at an acrobatics check, we can avoid falling down, so we can just remain suspended in mid-air. We get our final skill feat at level 20. We can take whatever we want, but for a capstone skill feat, I think risky surgery is very nice. We can retire and become surgeons, basically, although we are terrible at wisdom because we are constantly drunk. But thanks to assurance, hopefully, and this risky surgery feat, we can become very competent healers at the end of our career. You would also expect to have gained a pretty thorough knowledge of anatomy at this point, thanks to all the murder and dissection we have been doing up to level 20. And this wraps up our rogue character build. We end up with a very comfortable 350 HP. Our perception, despite the legendary proficiency, is garbage, but our stealth makes up for it. Our saving throws would be okay if it wasn't for this abysmal plus 25 at will. And this is really, while it is flavorful for a drunken master to not be very good at will saving throws, this is probably an optimal choice, and one that you need to really think hard when taking, because the DM can and will screw you over because of this. The best option would just be to maybe keep some of these modifiers, like the strength modifier, the constitution modifier, a bit lower, and just buff up wisdom. But then we would no longer be an angry drunken goblin. So as always at this point, before evaluating the build, we need to consider how good our damage is. So let's go do just that in the damage projection. And here we can see the first part of our damage projection. As always, we are fighting against a high armor class. Our comparison is the double slicing fighter. And this time it's important, we are, for now, assuming that we are not attacking a flat-footed enemy on the orange line. So these are just 2 regular strikes for our routine. And then in the green one, we are actually striking a flat-footed enemy, so we have a higher chance to hit, and we also deal our sneak attack damage. As you can see, though, even in this favorable situation, we are outmatched by the fighter. We do not have a high strength modifier, so our start for our build is very harsh, which can maybe help explain why we turned to excessive consumption of alcohol, which is eventually going to turn out to be the solution of all our problems. Now, starting from level 6, what I am actually assuming is, thanks to all our feats, we can now very reliably sneak attack and flank our enemy. So I'm going to assume that the enemy is always flanked. This assumption is not true for the fighter because they do not have all the feat supports that we do to flat-foot the enemy. So this way I'm trying to quantify how effective and impactful these feats are. Of course, in a regular party, the fighter and the rogue would be working together, so if the rogue can flat-foot the enemy, hopefully also the fighter damage goes up. But to better compare the builds, I'm choosing to keep the fighter against an enemy which is not flat-footed, so that the impact of the rogue feats is more apparent. So thanks to our stumbling stance and the fact that we can very reliably flat-foot the enemy, we have catched up with the fighter. We are actually better than the fighter at some points. And this is true up to level 10, where our build actually explodes. And what happens after level 10 is that first we get the Flurry of Blow features, and then at level 12, when we get our preparation action, what we can do is we can Flurry of Blow, then we can use preparation, and we can deal 3 attacks for the cost of 2 actions. And our third attack does not suffer from the multiple attack penalty because we are using it with our reaction. So as you can see, starting from level 12, we absolutely destroy the fighter. This is, however, still an unfair comparison because we are actually comparing 2 actions and a reaction against just 2 actions from the fighter. And actually, from level 10, the fighter will have access probably to an extra reaction thanks to the combat reflex feat. So if we show that, we see that actually at level 10, thanks to combat reflexes, the fighter once again catches up to us because of their extra opportunity attack, and they become way better than us. But then, magically, at level 12, when we also gain an extra opportunity attack, then once again we become better than the fighter, and we stay so consistently throughout our career. Keep in mind with this build that we also have the possibility to use a flurry of blows, and then use 2 actions to prepare an action, which is another flurry of blows. So we can, if we want to, instead of using 2 actions and a reactions to deliver 3 attacks, we can use 3 actions and a reaction to deliver 4 attacks, 3 of which will not suffer from the multiple attack penalty. Now, of course, this is very action intensive, but also keep in mind that from level 12, every time we flurry of blows, we also get a free feint. And this is a super feint because it will make the enemy flat-footed against all our attacks until the start of the turn. And in case of a critical success, also the attacks of our party members. So effectively, if we consider the free feint, what we're doing is, with this character, is using 3 actions for the cost of 1, which is the cheesiest abuse of the action economy system that I was able to develop throughout all my characters to this point. And it really shows. The damage we can deal at high level is absolutely insane. We are trashing one of the best damage dealing builds in the game. Of course, this is a very theoretical comparison, again, since I'm trying to quantify the impact of feats that make flanking and flat-footing more easy. The fighter is suffering and their damage is lower, but in a real game, the fighter will be flanking together with us, hopefully, and might be benefiting from the flat-footed enemy as well, so their damage would also be higher. We are not just buffing our damage, we're buffing the entire party's damage, hopefully. This kind of power, though, as we saw, comes at a heavy price, which is the dumping of our will saving throws. As high as our damage is, I cannot recommend this as an optimal build to play, and in fact we run the risk of being disabled very often, and if we are busy running away or trying to kill our party members, then we are not dealing any damage at all. Still, we managed to beat our barbarian build for the king of damage dealing among all the builds that I made, and that is very satisfactory, and I think it's also very fitting for the rogue, who is really supposed to be this very glass cannon-y explosive damage dealer. The other drawback of this build is the one that I was mentioning at the beginning, is that it's very slow in its start. So at the beginning, our racket isn't really giving us that many bonuses. We are very fragile and vulnerable, so this is certainly not a build for beginners. But on this amazing damage projection, let's close out the video and move to the final thoughts. So we were able to develop a rogue build that, starting from the mid levels, is able to deliver absolutely explosive amounts of damage. While it is relatively vulnerable on the will side of things, the survivability in terms of hit points and armor class is not that concerning. We have an abundance of hit points thanks to our free archetype and ancestry feats, and we also have a bunch of debuffs we inflict on the enemies and convenient reactions that increase our survivability. So I would say that we feel a little more safe than something like a war cleric who hasn't heavily invested in buffing their defenses, although we are certainly no champion in melee. Our explosive damage dealing potential is on top of our incredible skill proficiency. We took all the good skills to take up to legendary. We can be extremely stealthy, as you would expect from a rogue. We are also pretty good in social situations, so we can play a perfectly serviceable face. Although with our focus on deception and intimidation, I am pretty sure we are not necessarily the nicest of people when it comes to our diplomatic efforts. The most important thing that this build, I think, showcases is the power of action economy, action efficiency, and action economy cheats, even more so than our monk build did, because we really pushed it to the extreme, and I don't know if you can cheat out that many more actions with a character. This seems absolutely insane. The thing that I enjoy the most about this character, and the thing that I really like about the rogue in general as a class, is that it seems like a class which encourages a lot of tactical thinking in combat. If you compare this to a 5th edition rogue, A 5th edition rogue does want to get sneak attack as much as possible, but it's a matter of gaining advantage or being sure that there is always another ally next to the enemy. And since movement is so easy, that's quite easy to accomplish. There is even the optional feature in Tasha's Cauldrons of Everything that just allows them to give themselves advantage if they don't move. So I fear that for that kind of rogue, the playstyle becomes quite repetitive after a while, because you just make a sniper build, you sit in a corner, you give yourself advantage, you deliver your powerful single target strike, and then maybe sometimes you have to move around, reposition, hide if enemies rush at you. But in general, all combats feel kind of samey, and it's up to the DM to present you challenges and different situations where you might have to vary your combat routine. And every time that you do, you feel bad because you end up losing damage if you cannot do those two very specific things that trigger your sneak attack damage. On the other side of the spectrum, we have the Pathfinder 2nd edition rogue, which has this reliable way of enabling sneak attacks, which is flanking. And flanking relies on movements, which costs actions. So every battle feels like a chess game where you have to position your rogue appropriately to make the most out of their strikes. This is complicated by the fact that your rogue is survivable, so you may not necessarily want to put them in the best flanking position because this might leave you exposed. And so starting from this very simple playstyle, as the build develops, you get more and more options to apply the flanking. And this is particularly true for our build, but it's true also for other rackets potentially. So in our case, we can use the feint action in those circumstances where we cannot flank the enemy, maybe. And then we've got all these different tools at our disposal. We can intimidate, we can feint, maybe we want to create a diversion and sneak and hide and strike from the shadows. There are so many different choices we are presented that it's very unlikely that two combat encounters are going to look the same. The strategy behind these encounters is going to vary. And even if the DM throws at us relatively similar combat encounters, just by changing up the room layout and our starting positions, two battles may play out completely differently. And this is basically a guarantee that your character is never going to feel boring when you play it. And you're always going to have this very satisfactory payoff when you make clever tactical decisions of getting the extra sneak attack damage and doing tons of damage, which is probably one of the most fun aspects in combat. In conclusion, I think we can say that the rogue, while it's not the easiest class to play for sure, can be extremely rewarding. And so if you like this kind of play style and this kind of characters, then you can certainly be extremely effective both on the battlefield and in the other situations that will arise throughout your campaign. With that being said, I thank you all very much for listening, and I'll see you all in the next video.